about this. Rather than explaining. Oh, yeah.
I think my current state, I probably shouldn't take what it is.
I had a tiny little bit.
No, you keep it.
I mean, I've,
Yeah.
I've had,
Like 80 bajillion stuff like.
I've had horse, alligator, crickets. I mean, stuff.
I feel like I've been sitting on it, like, I didn't get it.
So, hey guys, when you travel, you gotta try to. Guinea pig. Gotta try stuff. That's you. All right, so we got Rhineland, and then 1937, who did Japan invade? China. And that thought was a quick little war. They take over some harbors. Basically, they thought it'd be like a colonial effort. China fought hard. Horrible, brutal. And then who did Spain invade in 35, 36? Who did Spain invade? Abyssinia or Ethiopia, very young. And then where was the horrible civil war that the fascists would win? Yeah, Spain. Yeah, Spain. So let's get to, we got to this, right? Are we here? Here?
They've had their.
Did we get this? Who wasn't there?
Yes.
We get this?
No.
And that's probably what with this. So Munich, from then on, when people refer to Munich, they're talking about appeasement. And even though in reality, the Rhineland was a bigger deal, Munich is appeasement. And a lot of people will say, you're like Chamberlain and gave everything away. No, Chamberlain, people who know will talk about this a lot. And so here's our article, The Peace in Our Time. A lot of people are overjoyed. Here is Chamberlain staring down Mars, the god of war. But there were a lot of people here thought that this was Hitler running all over him, Hitler goose-stepping over, and that's supposed to represent Daladier, Chamberlain, etc. The weak governments of Europe, the weak republics. And for years, to this day, people still refer to Munich. They'll say that you're appeasing aggression. It's another Munich. It's another Munich. And this would go on for a very long time, from the Cold War all the way through today. We used to justify war. How dare you let, during the Cold War, that communists win? So therefore, the United States would get involved in a horrible quagmire in Korea, a disastrous defeat in South Vietnam. You'd see it being used. We got to stop Iraq from getting weapons of mass destruction, or you're appeasing them, and the U.S. would disastrously invade Iraq in 2003. The war that was going on when you were born. And I heard people say the same deal about Iran. You're appeasing them by allowing them to have nuclear weapons, even though there's no indication they're going to build them. But that's to justify the war today. And I did hear somebody, I saw a little clip of somebody saying Munich, the United States can't not allow another Munich. We have to go to war with Iran. The war right now, that's, I don't know what it is right now. And there was, well, what happened to Munich? And the person who said it had no idea. They just knew, right? Someone they got a little note, say Munich. And so they got busted being incompetent. But people still bring it up, and that kind of shows how it's being used. So what lesson can we learn from Munich? The world is too complex to say you can't make a diplomatic deal with people. And this would be used as an excuse to not use diplomacy. Normally done by people who are more conservative foreign policy wise. Remember, conservative foreign policy, more unilateral, liberal foreign policy, more diplomatic, and they do not necessarily tie into liberal conservative economics. There's really only one lesson we can get from Munich. Don't trust him. So if Hitler wants to make a deal with you, don't do it. Walk away from a deal with Hitler. Other than that, the world is complex. We can learn lessons from it, but you don't get set rules in history because people are inconsistent. And Hitler proved he was lying. Just 5 months after this, Czechoslovakia, absolutely devastated by what happened. Their best defense is now gone. Could do nothing to stop Germany from taking the whole thing. And what is now, for a short time, they made the protectorate of Moravia, Bohemia, Czechia, but later Germany was just annexed. Part of Germany. And I do like this one. where it has, so war all blown up and it says, I will be good, Adolf Hitler. That's a clever cartoon. And this time, Chamberlain, the prime minister, vows to stop it. But nobody trusted him and no one believed him like Hitler. One more thing. So one of the symbols of Britain, especially the aristocracy, are umbrellas. You know, rains all the time. Umbrella. And Chamberlain would carry an umbrella. And so this umbrella, like this, would come to represent a peace. So if you ever see an umbrella, especially during the Cold War, that's accusing somebody of being in a peace. And so there were a number of people who were more conservative. John Kennedy was appeasing communism, which is kind of fascinating. But, for example, November 22nd, 1963, he's going to Dallas, Texas, on his way to speak at this place called the Trade Mart. And go through DV Plaza, because it's caught on film. Somebody was calling him soft on communism by putting an umbrella on. And to say Kennedy was soft on communism. Which is amazing since he nearly went to nuclear war. It's not communism. That's what rises above. Politics doesn't mean it's only truth. Only reason I'm mentioning this is because it happens to be the reason we know it. It was on a home video by a home movie by a guy named Abraham Zapruder. It just happened to be the only film of the Kennedy assassination of 1963. And right before Kennedy is hit, the fatal shot, you see this umbrella. Why? That. So that's what leading to what's called crystal knot. This is also known as the night of the broken glass. So it happened November 10th, 9th and 10th, the night of 1938. And it was preceded by 2 days before, a German diplomat was assassinated in Paris by a young Jewish man who had fled Germany, and his family was in the kind of a limbo to be forced out of Germany because they were forced to leave. He wanted revenge, and this would be used as an excuse to attack Jewish-owned buildings, businesses, synagogues, and people all over. This is what we call a pogrom, an organized attack. It's by civilians, but the government supports them. And it was the last effort to drive the last remaining Jews out of Germany. Do you remember the name of the laws that restricted Jewish rights? You remember the name of those laws? Yeah, the Nuremberg laws. And so they knew total war was coming. So many of the Jewish-owned shops, the last remaining ones, but Jewish-owned shops, the windows were broken in front. That's the night of the broken glass. And this is a synagogue in Berlin that was burnt down. The largest synagogue in Germany. That's the smoldering ruins of it. There's Hitler looking at the wreckage. And even though the Nazis, the government was behind it, they of course blamed Jews. And a number of leaders in that community, the remaining leaders, were put in concentration camps. The first time for just being Jewish, with the idea being the German people will be so upset with protecting you by putting you in these camps. And all these black dots were where there were organized attacks. Organized attacks. And so, remember when I told you about the genocide in the Ottoman Empire? And I told you Hitler would respond. Nobody today who remembers the Armenians. You remember me telling you that story? It was right afterwards. It's right afterwards. So once this happened, and taking of, and then with the Sudetenland, wars in it, they knew it. It's coming. It's just a matter of when and how. And so, what would Hitler's next excuse be? The Polish border. This little finger of land was taken from Germany in the Treaty of Versailles to give Poland access to the sea. Well, these kind of turquoise dots, that's majority German population. So Hitler wants to get like the Sudetenland, Germans, ethnic Germans are being brutally mistreated. Now, Poland had a republic, but it had turned into a nasty, brutish dictatorship that allowed its military to ossify, but they were no saints. After Munich, the Munich Agreement, Poland stepped in and carved out a hunk of Czechoslovakia themselves. So this was a pretty nasty, repressive government. But Britain and France vowed to defend them too, as the last bulwark against Germany. But Germany is thinking, okay, we don't think Chamberlain would do anything, but what if we have to fight a war with the British and the French, and what if the Soviets come into? And even though Stalin was furious with Britain and France, they just assumed they would ally against the fascists. But then, shocking the world, in the last week of August of 1938, Hitler and Stalin would sign a non-aggression pact, technically an ally. Sometimes you see it called the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Another common one would be Molotov and Ribbentrop. They were the foreign ministers of both countries. Here's Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister. There's Ribbentrop, the inept Nazi foreign minister. Most of the Nazis were absolutely inept or so corrupt it didn't matter, which once again, they still almost won. But they agreed not to fight. Both of them had their reasons. Germany didn't want a two-front war, just in case. They knew someday they were going to fight each other. And Stalin had purged 60% of the officers of the Red Army. He got rid of every officer of good standing, for the most part, had a good reputation, to make sure they would not threaten his rule. And so you can imagine what would happen to the Red Army. It was huge, but the officers were either complete sycophants or totally untrained. So he knew he wasn't ready to fight, but they both knew one of them is going to break it. Here's a couple cartoons. I like this one. I wonder how long the honeymoon will last. Here they are getting married, but you know it's going to break up. Here's another very good one. Someone is taking someone for a walk. And that was a term for fooling them. And you'll notice they're walking together but hiding their pistols. The big thing that's going to come out of this, and this shows it quite well. First off, they're going to split Poland in two. And they kept this secret. No one, especially the Poles, knew that the Soviets were going to stab them in the back. Secondly, they agreed to trade. Germany would trade technology, but the biggie, the Soviets had oil that Germany did not have. Thus the oil wells in Appalachia. Like Japan, one of the reasons they attacked China was for resources. So much of this war is about resources, and especially oil. Can you imagine fighting a war about oil today? But that's me actually being sad. All right, so that's Europe on the eve of war. And this is from Time magazine. And I like this picture because it shows Poland being surrounded. So they knew war might come here. Germany was rapidly trying to get their army ready to fight. The generals told Hitler they'd be ready to fight by 1945. But he wanted war now. 1945, that's of course when the war would end. They were not ready. The French had a powerful army. But their lesson from World War I, sit in your defenses and let the enemy come out at you. Which, solid point of view to a point. And thus the beginning of World War II. World War II would go from 1939 to 1945. September 39, August 45. And that is a French tank, good little Renault tank in Reims, a town in France. The French had good tanks and better tanks than the Germans and more tanks. They just didn't use them properly with poor leadership. They had lots of problems. And the picture behind is not that. Originally it was going to be that, but I put a different picture behind. See the picture behind? That's this. That's an Amtrak, an amphibious tractor they use to get troops to the beach. Anybody know where this is at? Okay. Good guess. Iwo Jima. Someone said that's Iwo Jima. Yeah. And that is volcanic ash that's hot. It was some of the most horrific fighting, even continent, and that's in the Pacific. So on two sides of the world, what an amazing fight. And we can only go through little details of it. So that's the way the situation was, though, in 1939. French, Germany, the British were ready for their army. It was tiny, so a powerful navy. Here's Poland with no idea the Soviets are coming in this direction. You want to see another pictorial representation of the situation? You see it? It's a pretty good one. Right here, this sums it up pretty well. Okay, whoever found this, that was brilliant. That is brilliant. Oh, really? Okay, so, poor Poland. So, September 1st, 1939, Germany acted like Poland attacked them first. But Germany attacked. Poland had brave soldiers, but they didn't really have tanks. They had not really improved their army since the 1920s when it was very powerful. And Germany still had the very, that reputation of a professional army, a cadre of trained troops. And Germany didn't have very good tanks, better than Poland's. What Germany did is they focused their tanks in 4 spots. And using the same tactics as 1918, when they broke through the Allied lines in World War I, their plan was this: break through the Poles who tried to hold the border, then surround. Break through and surround. But they gave it a name, and German propaganda implied that they reinvented war, even though it was just the same tactics now with more vehicles, called, you've heard the term probably, Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. But it's not different tactics per se, but it's more emphasizing tanks and armor. And German propaganda really played this, much to the fear of everybody, that their army was not only invincible, but it reinvented the entire way countries fighting. Everybody was behind. And yes, people were behind, just not as much as they thought. And thus, that is the London Evening News. And Britain and France both declared war on Germany. So overnight, in fact, you start seeing it in newspapers on September 3rd, World War II. And the previous war all of a sudden became World War I. Just overnight, that's how fast it happened. Just 2 days into the fight, World War II, you start seeing this. And so you could argue that the war really began in Manchuria and China, but this is when it starts to be called World War II. So Britain and France declares war, and Germany is advancing through this is in areas of Germany. You have the Germans coming out of highly German tanks. German tanks weren't very good at first. After the whole war, they had problems with tanks. But poor Poland, no matter how bravely they fought, they were taken by surprise. Their tiny air force was destroyed on the ground before they could come up. And then they were totally overwhelmed. How do I do this? Somehow I must hit the X and it says you can save it. Give me 1 second. I love that. Poland was overwhelmed once the Soviets entered the war. German dive bombers flew unopposed, and their Stuka literally means dive bombers, and it seemed like they were invincible. Now, as it turned out, they're really vulnerable to good fighter planes, easy to shoot down, but they didn't know that at first. They even terror bombed, remember Total War, Warsaw, to try to force their surrender, even though their military was defeated. A lot of Poles escaped. Thousands of Poles would make their way through Romania, that was still neutral, and they would join the British forces. And they would fight for the whole world. Poles would fight. They did not quit. But poor Poland is going to go through hell. No country in Europe is going to suffer more than what happened to the Poles. And almost 30% of the population is going to be killed. Including almost 2 million Jews. That's common. So, right after this happened, when they said the victory's coming, one more country joined the Axis. Tokyo, Japan joined. Which is fascinating, where you get these really intensely racist countries all joining together. But the tripartite attack, and this was called anti-Comintern or anti-communist. Now, it wasn't an ironclad alliance, and Japan was thinking about would they attack the Soviets or not. This was more just a political stunt in reality. So that's the situation in 1939. France and Britain had a tiny army, so they couldn't do much. They immediately initiated, remember the blockade they did in World War II, the blockades back. Britain had a lot of bombers to bomb German cities on the war, but they didn't want to do it yet. They're worried about retaliation, which was perfect for Germany because Germany's trying to get as many troops as possible. Their army was not yet ready to fight, and they're mobilizing as quickly as possible. Fortunately, not to beat the shit to death. France had 2.5 million men in uniform and a very good army, but they decided to sit on their defensive lines and not attack. And so Poland fell in a month, and then nothing happened for 6 months. This became known as the phony war. And here, bring your gas masks. Instead of bombing cities, RAF, the Royal Air Force, dropped leaflets telling Germany to give up Hitler. Think that's going to work? There's an isolated French soldier. And very quickly, Blitzkrieg, a British comedian, turned that into Sitzkrieg. Get it? There. Get it? You don't like 1940s British humor? The reason why the French were so confident was it's named after their foreign minister, an incredible line of defenses along the French-German border dubbed the Maginot Line. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought it was like a wall, like the Great Wall of China, but not at all. It's a series of forts all along here, all along the high ground. It's pretty mountainous, rugged territory, and it's drilled into the mountains. So they have long, elaborate tunnels connecting gun pits, turrets with big guns. Just an incredible fortification with quarters and hospitals for men to be in the mountain to man these forts and therefore be invulnerable, at least at first. And so any German attack would have to go past the guns of this mighty defensive line. And the reason why they did it was this. If they could block this off, that means the Germans only have one place to attack. They can't attack through Switzerland. This is a heavily forested region. You can see it right here called the Ardennes. The assumption is no one can attack here, so they can only attack through Belgium. And then the French will put their best forces there and stop them in Belgium and win the war. And if you ever get a chance, tour these forts, they're amazing. They had underground electric trains, huge turrets, thousands of men underneath. You can see why the French were so confident. When I toured the fort, we went through it. It's really cold. That little train still working. You had to take a train. It's so vast through these tunnels underground that were 100 feet below. So if you're claustrophobic, it's a little disconcerting. And it was hot that day, so we all could pants and coat because it was cold on those trains. And the tour guide we had only spoke French. And my wife can speak a little bit of French. I can speak a tiny little bit, 5 words. But she was able to translate enough. The only funny thing was the whole way he made fun of Germans, which I just thought was hilarious. But anyways, go through the fort. You can see why they're so confident. And the Sitzkrieg would be broken, though, in April 1940. Germany, to protect their iron supply in Sweden, attacked Denmark and Norway. They assumed, and they were right, that the British and French might try to seize Norway to cut that off. Denmark didn't have an army, so they only they surrendered within a day. Norway had militia, and they fought bravely, but the Germans overwhelmed them, and there were a lot of Nazi sympathizers in Norway, the whole Aryan garbage. And so Norway would fall. Britain and France were going to seize it, and so then they tried to stop the invasion. It failed for various reasons. But it showed that the Sitzkrieg was over. And just a month later, as the temperature warmed up, the first part of World War II would begin and end, in a way, the Battle of France. And Hitler would escape his humiliation. That picture might show it. Know where they're marching? That's the Arc de Triomphe. That's how the champion is. of the main street of Paris. Shocking everybody, the French army lost. They shouldn't have lost. They had better tanks. Part of the problem the French had, though, the leadership was so bad and they were kind of fossils. Men in their late 70s. Nothing wrong being in the late 70s, but they're still thinking 1915. In fact, their commander, General Gamelin, was so scared of radios, he refused to use wireless radios. So the Germans had an advantage there, and he was afraid of telephones too. And so his communications had to go by motorcycle courier. So they were always like 2 days behind. It's unbelievable how inept their leadership was, and the French soldiers would fight. They're so brave as good soldiers. So back to this. And attack here. The German plan, German generals didn't want this war. They thought they weren't ready. I should add, when it would work, and they might question Hitler again, you must know something. Their plan was, we can't go here, can't go here. Heavily forested area, what do? Put everything here, sweep through Belgium, sweep around Paris, and attack like that. Is that reminds you of another plan I told you about earlier? That's exactly their plan from World War I. That's what we call unmotivated thinking. Hitler didn't like it, he was upset with it. But then Germany got a break. A German plane, a little tiny plane called a Storch, which is carrying a German officer, a major, who had the plans for the German attack. He was handcuffed in a briefcase on his wrist. And they're flying in January 1940 along this border. The plane got lost and landed in Belgium by mistake. They got out of the plane, and technically Belgium's neutral, but got out of the plane, and once he realized it, he ran behind a hay bale and tried to use a lighter to light the plane. It was on fire. And didn't work because it was sleeting and the lighter wouldn't work. And so the Belgian got the planes and gave it to the British and the French. And the British and French thought, perfect. They're going to attack through here. We're going to put our best forces, stop it right there in Belgium, win the war right there. So Germany cheated and changed the plans. A brilliant, not officer, had come up with a plan. His name was Monsey. An attack here will turn into a quagmire, just like World War I. What if we take advantage of the fact that nobody thinks we'll attack here? Act through the forest. Right through the lightly defended area. And then this is the brilliant part of the plan. Tiny, but very good British forces and the best French forces will be here. Don't go to Paris, turn north and cut them all off. That became the plan. And drive as fast as we can, push, cut them off. It'll be such a blow, we'll win the war right there. Most of the generals didn't like it, but Hitler liked it, and that's what they did. So, they did a fake attack here. The British and French rolled their forces up here. In fact, the largest tank battle, it's still the third largest tank battle in history. It's going to take place right here between German and French forces. And French communications were so bad that the French won the battle and didn't realize it still so bad. That gives you an idea how they never caught on, that the bulk of the German army was driving through the forest. And when they broke through right here at a place called Sedan, and that Sedan right there, really pretty. One of the biggest battles in the Franco-Prussian War was fought. When they broke through, the French totally unprepared. And within 10 days, they broke through and made it to the sea. And even though they were vulnerable to be cut off, the British and French were not prepared for it. Totally taken by surprise. They were always fighting 2 days behind. Here are German forces on the advance. And even though German tanks weren't very good, they only had one tank that could match up with the best French tanks. Didn't matter. They cut through and broke and cut off their supply. And when they cut off here, all the British and French forces were fighting and cut off. It looked like it was over. It happened so fast that even Hitler, who wanted the plan, started to panic. Ironically, at the same day the Battle of France began, the same day, Britain picked a new prime minister. It had to deal with Norway, had nothing to do with France. A man that 2 years ago nobody would have expected to become prime minister. He had a terrible reputation. His name was Winston Churchill, right here. Churchill, who was a man who was considered to be full of dumb ideas, stuck on himself. He was constantly fickle. He drank brandy, sun up to sun. And considered economically inept for things that happened in the 20s. I mean, Churchill was considered to be a joke, except for one thing. He had warned about Hitler throughout the 1930s. So that gave him credibility. And when other more prominent politicians didn't want to be prime minister at the time of this disaster, Churchill jumped in. And Churchill is flawed in so many ways, but he's going to make a series of moves for about 3 months that arguably saved civilization. Yes. May 10th. So there's Churchill, the famous V for victory. By the way, if you go to Britain, that's V for victory. If you turn that around and do that to someone in Britain, you might get beaten. Just letting you know. Do not do that. This, okay. Not the other one. Not that. Don't do this. No, don't do that. Bad. Imagine it's like flipping someone off of wheels. Don't do that. Not to me. Go to London, find something. There's parts of town you have a lot of fun. And London and Brits like to brawl. Moving on. Yeah, don't do that. So he decided to pull the British soldiers out, and this will be decisive. And that's going to lead to the first week of June at a little tiny, probably more than a jetty and a pier called Dunkirk, one of the last remaining harbors. Hitler panicked when they won so fast and ordered his tanks, those are called Panzers, to stop. They could have turned north, but he ordered them to stop and refit because he couldn't believe how successful it was, and he thought he had to hold on to that line. And that gave the British and French almost 400,000 men. 200,000 were British, the rest were French, to pull back to Dunkirk. And the French fought incredibly bravely to allow British and some French forces to escape. And then they thought they would use the Air Force, called the Luftwaffe, to knock them out. But the Air Force did sink a lot of British ships, but the British sent everything they could float, including ships as small as 18 feet across the channel, crewed by Royal Navy reservists, and pulled out the troops. Here they are. The docks were knocked out. The docks were knocked out right away, so they had to climb out from the beach. Here they are, vainly shooting at German planes, crawling out to the beach. A bridge made of rowboats. They thought we'd be lucky to get 50,000 men. In a week, they got 350,000 out. They had very little on them except their body. All their supplies, all their heavy equipment, about 200, a little over 200,000 Brits and the rest were French. They pulled enough out. It's a horrible defeat, but they could stay in the war. If they would have been cut off at Dunkirk, they might have had to quit. They might have had to sue for peace. And who knows how history would be different. And that is going to be Hitler's first, you notice I put down first, fatal mistake. If he would have ordered the tanks, the commanders, to do what they wanted, and they would have taken Dunkirk, who knows? Who knows? So the little fishing boat I told you about, it's in the Imperial War Museum in London. It's so tiny, but they use that to sail across. And those are exhausted British soldiers arriving. Almost all the French soldiers who got back wanted to go back to France to fight for France, and they got back just in time to surrender. Those poor guys. But what about the rest of France? Their best soldiers then were cut off in Belgium. Morale just tanked. Defeatism took over. And there were actually many French politicians who were blatantly pro-fascist. And so France fell. It happened so fast. They fought along this line here, and for a few days held off the Germans. but then the Germans broke through. Here are the Germans breaking through, and the French army collapsed. There are two really famous pictures of the war. Here is a French police, a French soldier. You can see just absolutely devastated. POW, and look at the German soldier. Pretty confident. And these are French colonial forces. Colonial equatorial apples. And shocking everybody, on June 22nd, the formal ceremony for surrender was 25th. France. Hitler, the humiliation of losing will be done. Remember I told you they did it in the same railway car where Germany surrendered to France? There's Hitler stomping his feet. American and British propagandists would turn this into, they would put it on a leaf like that. And he danced a little dance over the death of allies. Press propaganda, but absolutely awful, devastating defeat. And with that, here are German soldiers again marching to the Champs, or to the Arch of Triumph. This is the other most famous picture. World War I veteran, a Parisian watching this and crying. Really famous picture. And Hitler had the town, all civilians had to lock themselves away in Paris. And the only time he went to Paris was right after he took the surrender. He took a half day, and like a tourist, he went to the Eiffel Tower. He went to see Napoleon's tomb. There he is. He'd never go back. France would be divided in two. Northern France would be occupied. Southern France would be called Vichy France. They were a government that was neutral, but they collaborated. And one of the greatest war heroes in French history from World War I, Marshal Ferdinand Pétain, right here. Pétain would become the leader of it in the late 70s, and he blatantly collaborated with the Germans. So how do you deal with somebody who was one of your great heroes from World War I, and then a horrific collaborator? World War II. French would struggle with this, trust me. Yes, they would collaborate in the final solution. So they were technically independent. Oh, Vichy was a mountain resort town. And originally they were going to meet someplace else, but Pétain liked being there because he liked being in the mountains. And it had a bunch of hotels, so they could have their government there. It was known for water, for the pure mountain water. So they would bottle Vichy water. So Vichy water was really well known. It was a thing to get. It was sparkling water, and that was a thing to get for like carbonated water in the U.S. was Vichy water. So that's not. So Britain's alone. But Churchill vowed to fight, and Hitler just assumed they would get peace. And the reason I kind of put right here, they actually had secret talks. They floated an idea of suing for peace and having conditions. But then Hitler or Churchill decided to fight. And this is how he saved civilization. He's going to make so many crazy, dumb moves later on, some good ones, but here Churchill's 5 months. And you know what? 5 months, that's long enough. So here he is with American submachine gun. Look at the home guard. Almost all the men who got back from Dunkirk didn't even have their rifles. They had no heavy equipment, and they're worried about a German invasion. He has an old 1890 or 1870s breech-loading rifle, and you see what those men are training with? Sticks. They don't have enough rifles. Those are home guard militia. That's how ill prepared. But they have a powerful Air Force and great Navy. And they will fight to the death. So that's when they took the Battle of Britain. Now, the Allies saw the Battle of Britain, the Germans did. The German plan was this. They planned for a seaborne invasion, but they knew they couldn't actually do it. But they thought if they could knock out the Royal Air Force, and they thought their planes like these Stukas were invulnerable, they could win the war. And so the battle is to kill as many pilots, knock out airfields, which is much harder than you think. Even with today's weapons, it's still incredibly hard. You can determine people with shovels and they can fix the damage really fast. But they thought they could knock it out. And this is going to turn into a horrible war of attrition. But fortunately, the Germans didn't have many heavy bombers. And their fighter planes didn't have long enough range. And the British had made two really good fighters that they were already mass producing. So they didn't have to make something new. Fortunately, they had two good fighters. A very good plane called the Hurricane, and one of the most famous planes of World War II. You know what plane that is? Have you heard of a Spitfire? Which, by the way, okay, I like World War II. I think it's a beautiful. I think that's a really cool elliptical wings. You got it. That's pretty cool. Even if you don't think so, act like it. Isn't that pretty cool? Act like it. Come on, give me something. So when we were in London, they did an air show, and I only saw it one time, but that World War II Spitfire flew. And it was really cool. But we were in such a bad position, I tried to take a picture of it, and the picture is like, looks like a little tiny dot. So it didn't come out very good, but I still saw it, so I can say that. And the other big problem with attrition is this. If a German pilot shot down, even if they survive, they're taken prisoner. British pilots shot down, they survive. Fight. And that is huge. So, another thing, the British, even though the Germans actually had a lead in it, the Germans were so anti-science that they never understood or used radar properly. And even though the radar was pretty crude, shoot radio beams up into the sky, they bounce off something, and they read it. Radar was supposed to be originally be used for picking up storms, bouncing off clouds. And 1940, the British radar, here are radar towers right there. And these women here are getting reports from radar stations to send fighter planes there. They couldn't tell how many planes there were in 1940. All they could tell was a lot of planes, few planes, but what direction they're coming. And the Germans never really understood how good radar was. There were always British planes waiting for them. Attrition. Knock them out. And then one more thing. Remember in World War I, the British had broken the German code? Remember the Zimmermann note? Same thing happened here. The British had broken their code. Not completely, but enough to know when main attacks were coming. The Germans thought their encoding machine was indecipherable. It's called the Enigma machine. It's actually a pretty interesting little device, but Polish intelligence got one, and they snuck it out before Poland surrendered, got to London. And so they were able to know just enough. And that's one of the biggest secrets of the war. The Germans never caught on. Never caught on. Once again, that's very good for the war effort. So the attrition was horrible. There are German planes being shot down. It's a German fighter plane, Messerschmitt Bf 109. I like the German pilot being taken prisoner. But it almost worked. The RAF lost so many pilots. They could make planes, but the pilots, they couldn't make it up. And then fatal mistake number 2. And we're not exactly sure how it started, but it appears as though the Germans accidentally bombed London. That is a really good picture. That is a German Hengel bomber, not a great bomber, but because they took small transports, made them bombers, because they're still trying to hide it. That's over London, that's the Thames. What an amazing picture, huh? They bombed London. Now, Churchill had been pestering the RAF to bomb Berlin. And they learned real fast. They got to bomb at night, so they just are going to try to lob a few bombs on Berlin. So Churchill finally got the Royal Air Force to retaliate and bomb London, or bomb Berlin. Hitler was furious. Goering, the commander of the Luftwaffe, was embarrassed. And so they switched tactics. They got impatient with bombing airfields, so it might have worked, but Germany turned to the Blitz. And that is fatal mistake number 2. The Blitz is what the British called the terror bombing of London. And at first they bombed in the day, but they had so many bombers being shot down and the RAF survived. And therefore they switched to night bombing. Night bombing, they couldn't hit anything, and so it's just to lay out as many bombs as possible and kill as many civilians as possible. 43,000 British civilians are going to be killed in the next 8 months. 139,000 will be wounded. Here are Londoners huddling in the London Underground. Here's burnt out areas of, that's actually Coventry. And the Germans would do a horrific thing called the double tap. They would bomb with fire bombs and then come back a half hour later and bomb the fire ships. Which of course the Allies would do. The British and the Americans would follow very quickly afterwards. And yes, the US and Israel did that against Iran. So, the horrors of total war. But after the initial shock, total war, the idea was they would be so mad at Churchill that they'd want to overthrow the government. That was the plan of total war. And the thought was, look at the hell of this. I'm not all about she said it. How did I do that? Save the cat. It was just awful. St. Paul's Cathedral, it's kind of London's cathedral. The US Capitol is a direct copy of St. Paul's Cathedral. Direct copy. The Capitol's smaller. But it's weird. You'll see that's the capital for such a time. They bombed, firebombed all around, and somehow it didn't catch fire. Somehow that cathedral survived. And it was all around. That's an amazing picture. But the RAF was saved. Britain survived. Did total war work? As it turned out, it doesn't work that way. Who do the Brits blame? Do they blame Churchill for the Germans bombing them? No, who do they blame? They blame the Germans. And what did they want? Revenge. Oh, I should have. Remember 43,000 died? Brits going to be the revenge. One night in 1943, this is just the first one. They're going to firebomb Hamburg. British are. There 45,000 hamburgers on one night. And that's just the beginning. Total war? No, they're not going to blame the Germans. They're going to blame, I'm sorry, they're not going to blame, they're not going to blame Churchill. They're going to blame the Germans. I'm sorry. By the way, the US has discovered this many times, including white now. They don't blame them, even if they hate their government. Hey, we're going to get to fatal mistake number 3. We'll finish this up tomorrow. War, Pearl Harbor. It's interesting. So we got the book. Anybody else? Oh, and guess what I just found out yesterday? All the rooms in the basement have got to be out of the room. They're going to start digging all this up. That's what all the power lines, facility lines here. So construction is going to happen fast. Next year is going to be amazing. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy about finding out. I have no idea what's going to happen. But they need them. I seriously don't know. And they literally know they tell me what. Picture really happy about it. Art is it's going to be awful. It's going to be awful for me. It's going to be terrible. You know,
because it's
think about that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Goodbye. Good day. We'll see you. Goodbye, everybody, and I would argue good luck. See you tomorrow.